Hey everybody! I have some new, sort of dead game news that I wasn't sure if I should cover, but this kind of falls in my ballpark enough that maybe I should. I have some new news and some older news, both newsworthy. The big new news is California has recently passed a bill into law that will require stores selling digital content to tell customers they're only being licensed digital media and don't own it. Now, is this a good or a bad thing? Well, that depends. That's why I'm making this video. I guess first off, I should say this was not my doing. Assemblymember Jackie Irwin, who introduced the bill, said, "The main story that brought this issue to my attention was Sony's announcement at the end of last year that digital copies of purchased content from Discovery would be revoked." So there it is. This is happening independently of us. However, I think almost all references to Ubisoft and the crew are 100% the result of our campaign. Except for a few articles by Games Media, without our involvement, I think the crew would have been almost completely ignored and have been just another dead game on the pile. So this was started by people complaining about Sony. This bill isn't part of a new timeline. Anyway, a few more details. This doesn't go into effect until the start of 2025. Companies that claim you're buying or purchasing content can be fined for false advertising, and it does not apply to stores that offer permanent offline downloads. But see, that's what these articles say, but I went and looked at the bill, and I'm not sure this is going to do much of anything. Look at this part right here. My first reaction is, I'm seeing so many openings, this looks like a shotgun blast. The way I read this, stores won't have to change anything. Except when you click on a button that says you're buying the game, you'll have a mini license agreement in addition to the regular license agreement you get after purchasing it, that says you have no rights, yada yada. I could be wrong, but that's how I'm reading this. Well, that's practically nothing. Companies will still be able to advertise that you can buy and purchase video games that can be taken away at any time. There'll just be one extra step. But that's my amateur reading of this. By all means, check for yourself. Yeah, in fact, let's try to be positive and assume I'm wrong. This is much more interesting conceptually if I am wrong. If I'm right, all that means is my cynicism levels are accurately tuned. That's no fun. So for sake of argument, let's say this means stores can no longer say buy or purchase of digital media that you can't back up. That would be progress, right? That's not an easy answer. See, this all comes down to framing. There's a chunk of people out there that think companies should be able to set whatever terms they want so long as the customer is informed about them. Well, that's largely the way most digital commerce has been acting already. I mean, those license agreements are already saying you don't own a damn thing, and most online-only games on the box or store page say internet connection required. Now, you can split hairs and say that says internet connection required and not company server required, but I think most customers that even read that label make that association. So clearer labeling won't change that. This just makes it more blatant. But see, this entire bill and framing assumes that not owning your purchase is a reasonable stance to begin with. And the issue is only about informing customers. And I'm of course in the camp that thinks there should be limits to what selling or licensing a game to the general public entails. For example, say I made a game that contained a keylogger and spyware, and I was going to sell all data I harvested to shady third parties who were probably going to use it for identity theft. But then let's say I clearly labeled that on the game cover. I tell you in writing that all your passwords and any information I gather from your computer is mine to do as I see fit. So I wouldn't be stealing your data. You would have agreed to this when you installed the game. Now you might think as long as that's clearly labeled, the free market would sort it out and no one would buy a game with shady spyware. Well, that would be true for some people, but what if the game was great? What if it was one of the best games you've ever seen? Then customers will be conflicted between wanting to play the game versus not being a victim of identity theft. Because the game's been designed to not have one without a risk of the other. It's a combo package. See, I think that would be predatory behavior regardless of how well the customer was informed of what's being done to them if they install the game. And you guessed it, that's how I view games being licensed to customers that can be disabled at any time with no information on how long they will last. So just because customers will be better informed their games are on death row with an unknown execution date, in my eyes, these terms shouldn't even be on the table to begin with. The problem isn't a button that says buy game. The problem is practices within the industry have become so predatory that this is no longer an accurate description of what's happening. And no, Rent Game isn't accurate either. Rentals tell you how long they last. The industry is trying so damn hard to reinvent commerce so that you're neither buying nor renting, but you're sure as hell paying the money and being left with nothing at the end. And you're not told when that's going to be. There's a reason I've largely abandoned the USA for trying to make progress on stopping the destruction of video games. ProCD versus Zeidenberg screwed us. I just can't see openings under the US political system. While I think this bill does almost nothing, I also think this is the best you could possibly hope for from the United States. This entire situation is a joke. Now, the reason I'm bringing all this up is I don't want this to color views of other countries, specifically ones in the European Union, but Australia also. See, here's the thing. The legality of publishers disabling video games with no expiration date that you've paid for is currently unsettled in many other countries. Now, we are getting that settled. It's being investigated by multiple consumer protection agencies. That's what a lot of you were helping with back in April. Now, as for how long that's going to take, who knows? But the thing is, video game licenses are often so egregious, they contain terms that likely violate Directive 93/13 EEC, which according to the EU Commission itself, prohibits unfair terms causing a significant imbalance in the parties' rights and obligations to the detriment of consumers. And some terms we see all the time in video game license agreements are the ability of the publisher to change the license after you've agreed to it, terminate the license at any time, which means disable your game, and even require you to destroy all existing copies of your game. Yeah, that sounds perfectly balanced towards consumers, right? So if a bill like this was proposed in the EU, it just wouldn't work, because it's like we're on another planet here. What would the label say? Paying for this game does not grant ownership. Instead, it is licensed to you under terms that violate Directive 93/13, and thus this license is null and void in EU countries. What? Exactly. This is what I mean. Everything is unsettled on this issue in the EU. So at this point in time, we still have a chance for ownership in countries outside the United States and aren't accepting this weak alternative to actually being able to own a copy of your game. The United States has already surrendered. This bill is just making it extra clear it's surrendered and you have no ownership. Except even that is afraid to go too far and leave some loopholes. And that is why I think it's questionable if even the generous interpretation of this bill is a positive thing. Because on one hand, customers are better informed, however flawed that may be. So that's a positive thing, right? Well, yes. But on the other hand, this is further normalizing the concept of consumers having no ownership rights. That assumption is baked into the legislation. Now, normally that wouldn't matter much for the United States because it already gave away the farm back in 1996 with ProCD versus Zeidenberg. But remember, the rest of the world did not. And at this point, the USA's only hope on this issue is in other countries. And no matter how you look at it, this bill shifts the Overton window in the direction of it being a reasonable thing for publishers to take away your purchase. To even question that concept is already outside the scope of acceptable discourse under this framing. So does the minor amount of good outweigh the anti-consumer framing? Well, I think that depends on whether this influences the decisions of consumer agencies in other countries. You know, the places we could have an actual victory instead of this pretend band-aid. Now you might think, wait a minute, this is for California. How could that possibly influence laws in other countries? Well, remember, the law in some of those countries is already not fit for purpose, and they're trying to figure it out right now. So the nightmare scenario would be they copy off of California's homework here since they were first, and decide customers don't own anything in other countries also. How likely is that? I have no idea. Personally, I think the negative aspects of this bill outweigh the positives slightly, but it's really hard to say either way without knowing what's going on inside the various agencies. Now, I saw some people looking at this bill as a stepping stone to better legislation. Like, because this has been passed, maybe we'll get a few more rights with another bill in the future, and so on. Okay, I'm biased, but in the United States, I consider that view optimistic to the point of being delusional. I've been at this problem for a while, and I can't even imagine how you would come to that conclusion. I would love to be wrong, though. So that's the new news. The old news that I think is worth still bringing up is Ubisoft has made a statement that The Crew 2 and The Crew Motorfest will be receiving offline modes. So assuming they're not lying, that means those games are going to be saved in some fashion in the future. That's good news! I was not expecting anything like this prior to a favorable ruling from one of the consumer agencies and Ubisoft fighting it in court first. Now this doesn't change our strategy at all, but this is a welcome consolation prize for me undertaking this damn campaign. Yeah, I'm absolutely taking part of the credit for this happening. I think if I never started the campaign, these games would be a death row like so many others. Although if you want to be pessimistic, it depends on what exactly an offline mode means. Remember a little while ago, Arcane Studios got shut down, but they managed to add an offline mode to Redfall on the way out? Great, except Redfall still uses de novo copy protection, doesn't it? And doesn't that require an online connection, just not a constant one? So now Redfall has an offline mode, but you need to connect online to use it? I don't actually know, since I don't have a copy of it. And information can be spotty on this sort of thing. But yeah, an offline mode requiring an online connection is about what I expect from the industry these days. Now maybe this is a false alarm, or else they'll remove the DRM later on and then Redfall will truly work offline? But who knows? In the meantime, I'm not sure if they've saved the damn thing. So hopefully Ubisoft isn't talking about that flavor of offline gaming. But this is probably a positive thing overall. Now that said, this still misses the mark. Sort of. If every company with an online-only game eventually added an end-of-life mode that only worked offline, I would say that's still not ideal, but that would be such a step in the right direction. I doubt I would have been motivated to launch the Stop Killing Games campaign in the first place. Because for single-player games, of course that's good enough. What's not to like? But what about multiplayer games? Or games like the Crew series, that are all single and multiplayer merged together? Yeah, offline-only multiplayer leaves a lot to be desired. You kind of need people to be able to connect via private hosting. Now the game doesn't need to have that functionality while it's being supported, I'm talking end of life. So offline only for a lot of online only games still isn't good enough if the game was advertised to be a multiplayer experience also. But that said, any company that adds offline functionality like Ubisoft is doing here is making themselves almost immune to consumer action on that title. The thing is, video games are complicated, and regulators don't always understand them. So any consumer action needs to be simple to maximize our odds. For example, I've received a lot of complaints about how Destiny 2 has removed a ton of content from their DLCs, and it's a big popular game. But I've never tried to organize any action on that. Part of that is because they're headquartered outside of the EU, which makes a huge difference. But the other part is that would be hell to explain to government officials. There's a good chance the people examining this may not know what DLC is. Good luck trying to explain that on top of existing law being unsettled. It's been hell trying to get any attention on this issue as it is. So any game that is still working but missing features or has other complications is a terrible candidate to take action on. This is why Ubisoft completely shutting down a major game like The Crew was so ideal to act on. But any company that adds a real offline mode to their game prior to shutdown is pretty much safe. Because this is already an uphill battle. Any nuance is far too messy to push through legal channels. So Ubisoft is protecting themselves on these games. I cannot say the same about The Division, Steep, Ghost Recon Breakpoint. This is a big problem in the industry. Anyway, the fact that our actions have resulted in a multi-billion-dollar company changing course on how they operate, I think lends this campaign a lot of legitimacy. Even though this is all an amateur effort, this is proof we at least have a clue about how to wield power, and the right channels to take to have a chance of solving the problem of games being destroyed. And that's about it. I take no pleasure in saying that I still consider the US a lost cause in terms of saving games, and this California bill only reinforces that view. Internationally, most of what's happening right now is us waiting on responses from various government agencies. All we can do there is wait. Now, if you don't want to wait, the only option at the moment where people can actively do something to stop publishers from destroying games is the European Citizens Initiative. And unfortunately, at the time of this video, the signature rate has slowed down to where it's not going to pass unless more people are doing something. I'm still trying to get signatures, but my reach only goes so far, especially when it comes to people who don't speak English. So, spread the word, especially if you're bilingual. You can go to StopKillingGames.com for more information. And hey, you may appreciate our wording on the initiative even more after seeing how incredibly weak California's bill has turned out. That's one problem we do not have. This bill is what happens when you aim for less than what's needed. Alright, try to get more Europeans to sign the initiative. See ya!